Well, guys, it's that time of the week again. The lineups are out for Super Rugby Pacific round 5. Before we jump into the players, quick look at the fixtures. This week, I'm really targeting this matchup here between the Crusaders and the Force. I think the Crusaders will bout them. I'm really stacking up on Crusaders in the positions where players score points. The other game that I'm kind of worried about is Chiefs versus Blues. I'm really devaluing players in this game this week just because even though I think the Chiefs will win, I think it'll be tight, and the Blues, even though they're struggling at the moment, they do still actually have a very good defense. So I don't think this will be a high scoring game. I don't think there'll be lots of tries being scored, but there's probably still room for a few Chiefs. And with the other matchups, I think they're all pretty good to play with. I do kind of like this Highlanders Hurricanes matchup, but yeah, I also like the look of the Reds as well. But yeah, wouldn't hesitate to pick players in these other matchups either. And another note as well, the weather for all of these game locations currently is looking good. That is subject to change though. We are a couple of days out at the moment. Obviously the Highlanders undercover as well, but yeah, even this Reds game at Suncorp at the moment, they've had floods there, but on Saturday it looks like it will be good conditions. So don't have to worry about any disasters like last week at Lautoka. And now jumping into the players, you can see my team here pretty much close to complete. Might make a change here at midfield, not sure at the moment, but I'm pretty happy with how I've gone. And we'll start with the outside backs. You can see down here, like I said, I'm really targeting that Crusaders matchup. I think they'll bout the Force. I've gone for the two big guns in the Crusaders, Will Jordan and Sevu Reece. They're my top picks for outside backs by a decent margin. The third pick, there's a lot of ways you can go. There are so many good outside backs. I've gone with Dalgunu because he is starting at centre. Normally I think players in the midfield, they're not as valuable as the outside backs, but Dalgunu's the sort of player you just got to get in the ball and he does things, and being at 13, he is getting a lot more ball. And we saw last week in that game against the Crusaders, he racked up a pretty massive score even with only one try. And yeah, he started that game as 13 as well. So I'm really liking the idea of him there. But again, so many more good options as well. Another player that I had last week who did well was Ruben Love. He's another good pick, I think. I think that Highlanders Hurricanes game, there could be points scored in that, and he's a great option. But yeah, you've got these other guys as well, Jorgensen, Corey Toole. I mean, Brumbies are at home against the Endure, he could get some play. Muirhead, his partner, he's pretty solid as well. Still not a fan of Mark Talair. That's going to be a tough match for him, may not get much ball coming his way. Tavatava Nawai, again, very solid player, but for all the excellent work he does in the games, he never seems to rack up those massive scores. Nadawa, I'm staying away from Chiefs in the backs because of reasons I mentioned earlier. Another thing to note as well is that Sean Stevenson, he is back and he's making his start at 15. Punavai, he's a guy who impressed me last week, got a lot of points for only one try as well. Look at this massive amount of line breaks. I mean, the Hurricanes, they did start piecing up the Pacifica at the end there. There were line breaks aplenty. But one thing I really liked about what Punavai was doing last week is that he was getting off his wing and he was going and looking for the ball. And that sort of player is the one that we really like in fantasy, because you look at a guy like Naholo, he tends to stay out on his wing. If the ball comes his way, great. If not, he's not going to go looking for it. But yeah, it makes a big difference if you have a wing who comes off his ring. Think about guys like Sevu Reece who are really good in fantasy as well. And yeah, I mean, if you're looking at those Canes outside backs, I like Ruben Love, but yeah, I definitely wouldn't turn my nose up at this guy Punavai as well. Other than that, you've still got Laganamasi for the Endure. I mean, that guy, he just seems to get tries. I don't know how he does it. They just come his way. You've also got Ravutal Munda. He came back to the Enduro last week. Didn't get much play last week, but I mean, the conditions, they were quite horrible for the outside backs. And for the Highlanders as well, you got Caleb Tangitau. I mean, that guy's a real live wire. And I mean, if you're a bit spicy, if you like this Crusaders matchup as well, I mean, I think it's crazy, but you could triple down, go for, say, Macca Springer out the back for the Crusaders as well. I mean, you feel like that back three, they're going to spread the points out a bit, but there's going to be a lot of points to go around. Maybe that'll be the play. Moving on to the midfield, things are kind of tricky again, as they often are at the midfield. I'm not super committed to this midfield, but yeah, I still kind of like it. I'm a big fan of Yosefo Masi. He hasn't done much this year. He got injured in round 1. Last year, he was an absolute beast. Between him and Ravutal Munda, they were just racking up stats like crazy, beating tacklers, getting line breaks, offloads, all that amazing good stuff. I'm willing to give him another go. And for the second option, I mean, things are kind of tricky. Like I was saying, I'm staying away from those Chiefs players, but Tupaia, I mean, it's kind of hard to turn your nose up at him because, yeah, I mean, he's right up there as one of the biggest point scorers in fantasy. Obviously, that ugly game in Lautoka was a bit of a write-off for all of the backs, but tricky thing about Tupaia though is that Rona, he is on the bench, and Rona, he generally does replace Tupaia. So I mean, it's possible they could do something weird like Rona comes onto the wing or something, but that's something you do need to be aware of. If you're tossing up between Tupaia and Leonard Brown, you may want to go for Leonard Brown. Otherwise, the Crusaders options are still very good in the midfield as well. David Havili and Braden Enor is back. He is replacing Daryl McLeod. Bear in mind that Almore is on the bench again. He is probably going to end up replacing Enor. But hey, Enor, he'll still have plenty of time to score lots of points. He's one of those fast centers. Like he's fast like a winger. So if the ball comes to his way in space, he could break through. He can score tries as well. And Havili, we saw him do pretty well against the Reds last week. Didn't get a try, but racked up lots of assists, got a lot of points through that as well as through his tackles. So again, he'll be another pretty solid option this week. But remember, you can only choose 4 players from one team each week. So yeah, you're probably gonna hit that limit. You're gonna have to make choices and decisions about that. Some other guys to be aware of, Hunter Paisami, he is back after his suspension in round 1 where he basically headbutted half the Pacifica and got carded. He's a good option, I think, and I do like this matchup for the Waratahs. And lastly as well, there's this option down here, the Blues. They have a fresh guy in the midfield. I've never seen this guy before, Chavi Taylor. Don't know much about him. I'm not considering picking him, but I was interested to see that, and I'm interested to see what he looks like. But also we've got Corey Evans. He's a midfielder, but he's actually starting this game at fullback. So that's an interesting choice as well, because I do think fullbacks are more likely to score points on average than midfielders. So normally I'd be pretty excited by an option like this, but again, that Blues versus Chiefs game, that's going to be tough for both teams. They're probably not going to be cutting each other to pieces. So yeah, might stay away from that one this week, but something to be aware of if it pops up again in future. That could be a nice one. And by the way, guys, I have considered with all of these picks that most of them are pretty unlikely to get benched, or if there is a chance that they'll get benched, it's probably the least likely scenario. Some exceptions here, like of course with the front rowers, it's kind of hard to avoid. But yeah, I'll talk about those more if it comes down to making tough choices and the bench might tip it. And yeah, moving on to 10, not a lot going on here. I mean, DMAC, he's pretty much our guy in fantasy. That's pretty slim pickings if you look anywhere else. The only thing to be aware of with D-Mac this week is that D-Mac, he's starting at 10 this week for a start. He's not at 15. Sean Stevenson's come back at 15. Josh Jacob, he is on the bench, so D-Mac, he could still end up being replaced, although I suspect what will happen is that D-Mac, he will move to 15 later in the game, and Jacob will come on and maybe replace Stevenson or one of the other outside backs. Maybe Stevenson will move to 14 and Nadawa will move to center or something. I don't know. But yeah, it seems really hard to believe that they would sub D-Mac, especially if the game is close. They'll want his influence on the park. So yeah, just something to be aware of there. And again at 9, things are pretty straightforward. Cam Roigard, he's the man. I mean, he came off the bench last week, but he still got 39 points. Like, he just came on, and the Canes were really threatening to come back against the Moana. They were cutting into pieces, and yeah, like, look at all these try assists, line break assists. Like, he really just owns this spot as far as fantasy goes. Like, there's not much else worth looking at. Even if he doesn't start, it seems like he's still the best option. Kate would probably be the next cab off the rank, but I mean, yeah, I really, this Roigard, he's pretty much a must pick. Now with the back row, I've gone for Christian Leo-Willie, Charlie Cale, and Harry Wilson. The Leo-Willie pick, again, that's me really trying to get a piece of that Crusaders blowout that I think will be coming. He seems to be the most damaging runner in that Crusaders back row, most likely to score a try, and we can see he did that last week against the Reds. Made a lot of tackles, beat some defenders, got a line break. He's probably going to have a pretty decent run this week as well. Not normally a player I would be that excited about picking, but yeah, it's all about the matchup this week. And look, Charlie Cale, Harry Wilson, I'm a big fan of Charlie Cale in general. Brumbies, they're playing at home this week. They're against the Endura. They're no joke, but the Brumbies, they should be able to handle them again when they're at home. And yeah, I'm hopeful that he picks up a few more points here. And Harry Wilson, again, Reds at home against the Waratahs. It'll be a good game, but not the toughest opposition either. And yeah, he had this huge game against the Crusaders last week, but I mean, it's not just last week. You can see he was good against the Force and the Pacifica as well. So yeah, just a huge amount of tackles, a couple of line breaks, one try to boot. I mean, I'm a big fan of these number 8s in fantasy, and Harry Wilson, he's one of the good ones. So yeah, that's my third pick. But there are so many options in the back row to consider. The other ones I'd look at, Fraser McWright, also in the Reds. At the Endrua, Thanakai Vada, he's a player who's often come off the bench. This time he's starting. I'm a big fan of his. Darren Alangi as well. He normally starts at 8 instead of Thanakai Vada. Normally ends up getting moved to 6. And another one is Luke Jacobson. He's been out for a couple of weeks now. He's back, and I don't think he's the most exciting fantasy pick anyway, but it's important that you know that he's back, and he is one of those guys who can get those turnovers. And we saw against the Blues last week, the Brumbies, they just turned them over like crazy at those rucks in the second half. So turnovers, they're really valuable in this game. You get 4 points per turnover. So yeah, if there's a guy who's going to get a bunch of them, it's not a bad idea trying to get a piece of that. But yeah, not really a favorite option for me, but one for you to consider. The Hurricanes back row, they're also strong. Karifi, Shields, Lakai. Braden Iose has gone to the bench this week. He will probably be replacing Brad Shields. Brad Shields seems to be the one who always gets subs, but usually it's either Lakai or Karifi coming on. But yeah, I mean, all of these guys are pretty solid, but when it comes down to it, I still don't prefer them above the 3 I have here. Now with the locks is always a tough pick for me because it feels like there's no good picks and locks really. I've gone for Cam Christie and Tupou Vaa'i. Vaa'i I feel like is quite consistent as far as locks go. And you can see here he generally gets a bit of over 30 points when he's starting. He doesn't get subbed as well generally because he is their number one lock. And yeah, I mean, that's the best sort of thing to go on, I think. The other pick I've gone for is Cam Christie. He's a guy we talked about last week because he's one of those loosies who's starting at lock. He actually plays at 6. He was really good against the Brumbies last week, not just in terms of fantasy, but in general. Watching him play around the park, he was quite impressive. You can see he does get quite a bit of line-out ball. He got 2 line-out steals, which, I mean, that could just be a one-off. Maybe that's padded his score out a bit. But he's also probably not going to get subbed this week. Anton Segner's starting at 8 for the Blues, and he's probably the one who's going to go off for Cameron Suafoa, who's on the bench. Suafoa started at 8 last week. He was super impressive, and I expect him to go back to that position this week as well. So that's one of the reasons I've gone for Christie, just because I feel like he probably is going to get that full 80. And the other options I'd probably look at is maybe these Reds locks. Canham, he had that huge game last week where he just went on this barnstorming run, and that's probably where he got most of his points from. But Ryan Smith, he's also pretty solid as well. You can see averages above 30 points, which is as good as it gets for a lock. And I think generally Ryan Smith is the one that does not get subbed. I think he is preferred as the number one lock, so you may lean towards him. Another option I was considering was Zach Gallagher, the young import to the Canes from the Crusaders. I really like this guy. I think he is the goods, but he probably is going to get subbed, so puts a bit of a damper on him here. Walker Leawari's on the bench. He probably will come on. Really interested to see how he goes, though. I think this guy's the goods, and we'll see how that plays out in fantasy. Now with the hookers, and the big news here is that Rikatali is gone. He's not even on the bench for the Blues. I don't know if he got injured or what, but he's been replaced by Kurt Eklund. He's starting for the Blues. Another pretty handy hooker, but he's been injured for a long time as well. He wasn't so great last year when he replaced Rikatali as well. It's been a couple of years since Kurt Eklund was really looking like he was in good form. So yeah, I mean, it makes it a pretty wide open field. Like, none of these other hookers really stick their hands up, but Cody Taylor is who I've gone for. Obviously he's only just came back, played his first game last week, but I'm thinking the Crusaders, they might be able to get their maul going against the Force this week. And yeah, if they do, well, Cody Taylor, he's going to be the one to benefit from that. And out of all these other options, I mean, I think Cody's pretty good. But yeah, other options I would consider probably Porricky and Fezler. Porricky's pretty solid, but he always seems to get subbed pretty early. The Waratahs, they really like their bench hooker, so they bring him on kind of early. And Fezler, I like Fezler, but he hasn't been that big this year. He also gets replaced pretty early by Richie Asiata as well, who's another good hooker. And maybe Oakland could actually be worth considering now that I think about it, because the hooker that the Blues have on the bench, it's Nathaniel Pole, I believe, and yeah, he really struggled last week against the Brumbies. Like, the Blues set piece, it just went to shit when he came on, and it really looked like the Blues, they didn't have a lot of faith in him. They started getting him to throw to the front and then to do these sort of trick throws, and which backfired. And yeah, it just felt like that lineout was really desperate when they had to rely on him. So I'm thinking, again, this is a tough game for the Blues against the Chiefs. they might just leave Eklund on for the full 80, especially if it's close near the end. And yeah, a front rower getting a full 80, like that's pretty appealing, because they're always getting points through those scrums and those lineouts. So that's definitely one to consider, but it is kind of risky because we haven't seen Kurt Eklund play for a while. We don't know what he's like. He's been injured. He could be rusty. He might just need to be subbed anyway because he doesn't have the fitness because of that. So something to consider, but yeah, I don't have the appetite for that type of risk. And lastly, we have the props. I've gone for Angus Bell and Xavier Numere. Bell, he's a pretty much a lock for me. I do think that he is the best prop in fantasy, and I mean in general he's just pretty good as well, just in terms of being a rugby player. He put in a lot of minutes last week as well against the Western Force. You can see he got that +2 for minutes played, which means he played over 60. I'm pretty sure he was still on in the 70th minute as well. And if they're having a tough game at the Reds, if they're behind and they're still trying to catch up, they might just leave him on. And yeah, I mean, why wouldn't you? Look at this, 6 defenders beaten, huge amount of points. Their scrum's pretty good as well. Got Tupou on the other side. I mean, I don't know what their scrum's going to be like against the Red scrum. I don't think it'll dominate it, but yeah, I mean, very strong option at prop. And with Numere, he was a guy I picked a lot at the start of the season, and it didn't really prove out. You can see his scores, they really aren't that great. He doesn't seem to have the same form he had last year, where he was really a powerful runner. He was able to bust a lot of tackles and get those offloads. He was just a great ball player in the front row. Hasn't happened this year. A lot of that's probably related to the Hurricanes and the fact that they're just struggling as a team at the moment. That might turn around though. I think it could actually turn around this week as well. So I've picked Numere with a bit of hope, but that's not a lock. You can make other choices here, and I wouldn't begrudge you that. The other guys I would look at, well, the obvious ones are the Force props, Pierce and Robertson. But, I mean, we saw them both sort of stumble a bit against the Tars last week. They just didn't get any points at all for scrums, and that really put a hole in their scores. And yeah, the scrum, it was actually under the pump quite a bit as well. And I have a suspicion that might happen against the Crusaders this week too. You've got that All Black front row. You got Cody Taylor, Tamaiti Williams, Fletcher Newell. That's a pretty intimidating scrum to be going up against. So yeah, I just have a feeling that this is going to happen again, and it could end up being the end of an era for the Force props in fantasy. I mean, I won't call it yet, but I have that suspicion, I have that concern. But still, they're not bad options to go for either, even if they don't win all the scrums. I mean, these two guys, they really do make a bunch of tackles, and even if the Crusaders are dominating this game, I mean, you know, if they use those forwards, there might be a lot of tackles to be made, but I do suspect the Crusaders are just going to be able to spread the ball and carve them up. So yeah, I wouldn't back on that. That's why I'm not going for them. The other options I would consider though, if you're still looking for more, is the Chiefs props. Just because of the way the Blues play, they use that forwards grinding style. It means there's a lot of tackles to be made, sort of one out from the ruck, and the big beneficiaries of that are the low numbers, the tight forwards, the front rowers. So, I mean, we saw in week 1, they did actually end up getting a lot of points. Dyer and Ollie Norris, 30 points each, 20 tackles here. They were also sort of dominating that Blues scrum as well, although that mostly happened later in the game, but maybe the same thing will happen again this week. I'm not sure. But yeah, those are all the options I really have to present for prop. It's never really exciting here. The Crusaders props, I mean, Newell did really well last week. probably just going to be a one-off. I mean, maybe not, but again, if you pick the Crusaders players, they take up one of your 4 slots. So yeah, I think they're really better spent in the backs. But yeah, just something to keep in mind. Anyway guys, that'll mostly do it. Again, just a reminder, I did check all of these players for what their prospects were for getting benched, and I think they're all pretty safe except for the ones I mentioned. And again as well, I checked the weather for all of these games. Conditions at this moment look good on Friday and Saturday for all of these games, so nothing to worry about there, although you might want to check it closer to the game just to make sure that you haven't invested in a game where it's going to be pouring down like it was in Lautogga. But let me know what you guys think. Drop a note in the comments if you have other ideas or if there's anything that I've missed. I usually do miss a few things and I like to be made aware of it so I can adjust my team accordingly as well. And hope you all go well. I'll see you in the next one.